special work session for Monday, March 25th, 2019. Agenda item 1 is a resolution, or rather resolution number 4-19, a resolution of the Mayor and City Council of Laurel to adopt wireless facility design guidelines consistent with all applicable federal and state laws for the siting, construction, installation, co-location, modification, relocation, operation, and removal of wireless technology and associated equipment within the city's public right-of-way. Good evening, Mr. Frost.
Good evening, Mr. President, council members. Well, a lot of words, but ultimately what this is another step in the evolution of, well, it says, we talk about small cell, but we have to be reminded that this is all wireless communication. So small cell is what's driving a lot of it, but it's basically anything or anybody who wants to put stuff in our rights of way that has got a wireless component, and that could be BG&E, it could be anybody. They would all have to meet these guidelines. So the FCC in the fall put out some orders that took effect in early January, and they established shot clocks, some of the stuff we've already talked about. So the other piece of this was that they want municipalities, towns, villages, counties throughout the country to provide guidelines for this wireless technology. And they set a deadline of April 15th for one specific piece of this design guidelines. And the specific piece they want you to tell the telecommunications folks is where you prefer siting of this wireless technology, where you least desire it to be sited, and then if you have any other specific things regarding placement. So in the first page or two of this document, you'll see that is indicated by us. The rest will still evolve as we go down the road and as they start to actually be installed. And the reality is, in Maryland, there's very few that I think Baltimore City may have some right now. But in general, it is nowhere near widespread as far as small cell deployment. We're still kind of waiting for a lot of this to shake out. And I think most of you are aware that there were several bills at the legislature this year, one that's proposed by the industry and another that was proposed by MML and MACO. All of those bills have been put to summer session and for study, and we'll come back next year. But in the meantime, the technology still rolls out, so we're trying to get all the pieces in line. As a result of the bills in the legislature, what was basically come out of it is that if Maryland, if you don't get us an ability to come in here, I don't want to say easily, but with similar standards throughout the municipalities and the counties, you're going to be at the end of these deployments. So MML is pushing that the municipalities and the counties go their own way as far as how they want to go about this. They are proposing some standards they want us to look at, and this design guideline started as a template from MML. It's only about 50% of what they originally sent out. We've changed a lot of it. And the next piece they want to do is applications. They've given us an application from Rockville they want us to follow. So at least if the cities and the counties can get an alignment where they know where they're coming into, the whole process will go better. So you have 15 pages. This document is a compilation of several documents where we have called out what we think is the best design guidelines. I see this document being amended probably as early as the summer as the technology starts to roll out and we start to see how it's really progressing. But the basics are here. I don't know how much time you've had to look it over the weekend, but I'm prepared to answer any questions. Mr. President, I don't know how exactly you want to go through, if you want to go through the whole document, or you just want to look at pieces of it.
I think if the council's agreeable, that will start off with the, highlight
Okay.
from the document, and then we can drill down specific.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little detail in the first couple pages. And the first thing is definitions. This all connects to Ordinance 1933, which was passed several months ago, which is our primary wireless facilities guidance and rules and regulations, so to speak. All the definitions go back to Ordinance 1933. They all refer back. As far as our preferable locations, we want to see commercial and industrial areas, arterial right-of-ways, which are basically roads off our main thoroughfares, and then retail, commercial. We have parks and facilities where feasible. We do believe that there are some parks, some of our larger parks, that could, in the boundaries of those, service the small cell locations to keep them out of the heart of a residence, so to speak. Least preferred is obviously our historic district, our residential area, and our residential areas. And we recognize that both of those are not exempt from small cell or this wireless technology. And the FCC has told us we can't ban them from going in those areas. But basically, we're telling them that you will receive more scrutiny when you go in those areas. We also talk about co-location preference. For us, we do not own utility poles in the city. Very few of them. I think we have 8 or 10 street lights. We have told them in this document that we will not allow them to put small cells on our historic lamps on Main Street. So most of our small cell installations will come co-located on existing utility poles and then new poles. We think a lot of our technology will go on existing utility poles, and that's what our preference is, that they go on existing utility poles. In Section 6, there's a bunch of guidance related to locations, such as within a fire station ramp, a lot of that kind of stuff. There's discussions about the boxes themselves, the antennas, the heights, that they're to be colors. For the heights themselves, typically a residential zone is 30, and then 35 in commercial and industrial is 40, and that includes the antenna. So the highest you could have in a residential area is 30 feet with the antenna on top of it. Location of equipment talks about, and ground location of equipment talks about, on the pole itself, there's a radio box, there's an electrical box, there's a meter most likely, and we talk about those locations, what they should look like. They should match the color of the pole. Shrouds, the wires should not be visible. Ground-mounted equipment is stuff on the ground, which we're basically saying we don't want it. Figure out a way not to do it. And all of this stuff, none of it can interfere with the sidewalk and people walking by or in the street itself. We also talk about city-owned wireless support structures. Like I said, most likely for us are 810 street lights, intersection traffic lights poles would likely be small cell potential facility structures. Concealment, there's a lot of good technology coming out now on concealing some of this stuff, especially the way the antennas look. Obviously, you can't totally conceal a pole, but they're doing a lot better than what they used to do, where you had many wires hanging all over, going up the side of the pole. None of that in our guidelines is allowed. Throughout the document, there are discussion points where they could come in and we could have a discussion And based on the guidelines, they could make a request to the city administrator to deviate in a couple areas based on their proposal and maybe unique circumstances, as long as it was acceptable. In the back of the document, there's a couple of just graphics that talk about, how poles should be put in residential areas, commercial areas. They can't be in front of houses. They can't be in front of your storefront, in front of the doors. That's between buildings, between houses. We show pictures of corners and intersections, how they should be placed. And in general, we say in the historic district, they're to do anything they have to do to keep from being on the frontage of the houses. We have talked to them in the document about potentially in Old Laurel, where we in many cases have utility poles and the cable and electric is in the rear of houses, that if they were to look at that we would be open to it. So that would be using their utility easement. That would keep these facilities behind the houses, there's no visual impact. It will lessen the visual impact and keep them out of the front of the houses and out of the sidewalks. That's a quick run through of the document. I'll entertain any question.
Okay, I'll start with Councilman Bidnor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, Dr. Fox. Question for you. Well, not a question. Reiterate what the FCC hasn't given any guidelines yet. Is that fair to say?
No, they have given guidelines.
They have. Okay, so this instruction that we have would be our Bible until it's official from the FCC saying this is how small cell towers have to be implemented in every jurisdiction.
The FCC has not given any specific guidance in design guidelines. They have addressed the permitting process, how long it would take us to approve a permit. They've told us that we cannot deny a permit based on siting, and we don't want it in a specific area, for like an historic district. They have told us the fees we can charge. They've given us a ballpark range, very close range on the fees. And they've told us that in the area of emissions, as far as RF radiation and emissions, that we cannot deny a permit based on some medical concerns we may have about the wireless emissions coming off the small cell or any wireless technology. That cannot be considered. Okay. And let me just say that the boxes themselves do come with an FCC approval as far as the emissions in the radio frequency side.
Okay, follow-up question. This proposal will be submitted to the FCC. They have it on file. They know that how we operating, or?
No, but they won't know how we're operating.
Okay.
But they've told us we need to do this.
Okay.
Yes.
By any chance in the future they can, well, I guess the question I'm trying to put in my mind, I guess, is like, there's no standard policy from them yet.
No, and they're not going to give us any.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Nicholas.
Yeah, just a few follow-up questions. The first thing is, you said these they can or cannot be in historic districts.
They can be.
They can be. Okay.
Yes.
And then my other question, I was trying to take notes quick as you were talking. With the radio box and the electrical box, what sizes are they?
So that we talk about size in here. But basically they'll probably about that wide, mm-hmm. and probably up to 4 to 5 feet high. So we want them narrow on the pole. Mm-hmm. We want them on the opposite side of a sidewalk, so to speak, if that's the case. And if possible, we don't want you to be able to see it from the other side.
And you said that the wires will pretty much be invisible, or they'll be mounted down to where you can't.
So on a utility pole, they'll be up higher, and there is a conduit on those. On a new pole, it would all be inside. You would not see any outside wires on those poles. But on a co-location on an existing utility pole, I think they can have up to a 4-inch conduit going up, in which the wires would be inside that conduit.
And then you said also that they cannot be in front of houses, but they can be like between buildings.
So they can be in front of houses. We discourage that. But if you have two houses, We want it between the houses,
Between the house,
not
okay.
so when you come out your front door, you're staring right at it, or you look out your front window. It would be between the property lines. And for commercial buildings, it would be on the edge of the building or in some way where it would not block the storefront, the view.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Councilman Les?
Yeah. Ask two questions. New construction will all be underground?
It could be. There is guidance in here on underground fiber connection. So ultimately, they need to get back to some point where they connect to the main system, so to speak. A lot of that will be done wirelessly, but at some point, there will have to be some underground placement of fiber, most likely.
How does that jive with the fact we have a requirement in Maryland to put new utilities around for new development?
Well, in a new development, that would be the case. If we had new construction, yes. But if we're talking to existing Old Laurel Historic District, that would not be the case.
But even under the new construction, it's got to come above ground some, correct?
Correct.
Where I read, you've got a mismatch with what's required under states' rights. The placement of utilities. I'm looking at Larry. We require new construction utilities to be underground. That's a state requirement. Now it doesn't jive with what's in this document.
So in a new residential area, let's say,
Yep.
it's very likely that these facilities will be on top of streetlights.
Or you want to touch that one with the 10-foot pole? Amen. Telling you, some communities, you don't have street lights. The lights are owned by the property owner. They're in their driveway. But I'll let Larry struggle with that.
And this is already, I don't want to say it's been addressed, but it is a concern. And those areas in the deployment itself will most likely be last.
Okay. It's just a mismatch.
I've already had a discussion with them
One
about
has
this.
to do with federal right, one has to do with state. Federal does not tell you to put all utilities underground. State, the local jurisdiction. Let me come to, we're doing this because somebody wants an economic advantage in installing this, trying to get ahead of the curve. That brings me to providing all these ways to install it. Where's the requirement to move it?
I believe in Ordinance 1933, there is a removal requirement.
It doesn't run with distance. What's in stock? That's why you've got ricochet devices
Right.
still around. Just saying that.
I think we even have a piece in here that talks about
Okay.
it has to be removed.
And how can we do that? Because this is being dictated by federal law. I'll come back to Comcast cables hanging all over Laurel, off telephone poles. They're no longer used because Fios took over that area. Got these wires hanging all over them.
Right.
Okay.
But I'm pretty sure, Councilman Les, we have a wording that says 60 days or 90 days, or once informed, they have so much time to remove it.
What's the force? What's the force, Kevin?
Our police
Is there a
powers.
bond that they post? What if they're bankrupt? Which is what happened to Rick. I'll just point that out. I'm not asking for the answer.
Yes,
I'm just throwing it over the wall.
we say in here that we would remove it and we would bill you, but if you're bankrupt, obviously, that's not going to happen.
Let me come to the issue of emissions. Read this doc. I don't know what the RF.
The RF emissions on this are, I mean, in a sense, they're low. They're like 40 milliwatts. It's a very low wattage emission.
I'm not the expert. Medical, okay? I'm not the medical expert that says hold the cell phone close enough
Right.
for long. But what I do know this is not the only thing that's traveling here. You got microwaves. That's from top of the big building. Hopefully they're not aimed down to where I am. We've got electric, high voltage electric wires. All I'm saying is it would appear to me there is a cumulative issue of all these different things traveling here that are being ignored. Again, I'm not looking for an answer. I'm just throwing it over the wall.
Nope.
The last thing comes. I don't expect. But these are things that I think about when I read stuff.
And yeah, and you're not the only one. The FCC has done some studies, and they're saying that
I don't trust them. I don't trust them.
But there are people who out there.
I work for the federal government, and I don't trust them. I think that they don't tell the whole truth.
Councilman Les,
Yes.
you know, you may have your feelings about the FCC, but the problem is we have to follow the edict of the FCC.
I agree. But I think that these are things that we need to be aware of in the city as elected officials. Let me come back to the historic district. I'd like to know what Annapolis is doing and what Williamsburg is doing. I can't imagine anything poking out of the top of a street light in historic Williamsburg. I just can't imagine it. And yet they have people that stay in bed and breakfast, hotels. You know, they're doing something different down there. I just like to understand that.
Yeah, I've done a little bit of research before, but the reality is everybody's doing exactly what we're doing right now.
Okay.
So by the end of April, we'll be able to go and see what Annapolis did. I know in Bel Air, where I live, they just did theirs, and they have an historic area. They basically did exactly what we're saying.
You got Chestertown, Bel Air, Annapolis, Williamsburg. I mean, there's enough places to look
Right.
at to understand what they're trying to do. The last thing has to do with, so people understand, people have asked me, is this new technology? That's an evolution of this technology. Is that the right way to explain it?
Yeah, it is an evolution. It is also a change in the model of how they're doing business. And
It's on, Audrey. Thank you.
but this technology is higher in wavelength, where they've gone. But wireless technology is wireless technology.
Yeah, this will be superseded by something else eventually, I believe. That's just, my colleague says he's for technology, so am I. I'm going to be gone when it comes. But there'll be some other technology, hopefully that will supersede this. Reminds me of the dishes. It started out at 8 feet. And I think in sitting in this chamber, I said, well, go to Japan. They're already this big in Japan. They made a decision in Japan because of the congestion. They didn't want 8-foot dishes. They
All has to do with what frequency you pick.
18-inch dishes, that's correct. So this will evolve to something else eventually. And this is going to be a never-ending battle with the city, with ordinances to try and accommodate it. Just like Comcast on copper has been superseded by fiber. Mr. Tesla were still all around, you wouldn't have any electric wires to the lights. It'd all be traveling through the air.
Well, then I would be worried when that's happening, enough to light a bulb.
Well, but again, I think that people need to realize, at best, my mind, this is temporary at best. It is a temporary ordinance to accommodate a current need. And this will be superseded by something else eventually. But that's just my perspective. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman Liz. Mr. Frost, I've just got a couple of I think, probably more points of clarification for me. Early in your presentation, you mentioned that, I'll just say we were waiting for issues to be resolved. I wasn't clear, and maybe I just missed it. Was that the FCC or was that Maryland Municipal League, which I think I took it to be, was waiting for issues regarding some of the Maryland legislation?
Yeah, so actually we've been waiting initially in the fall for the FCC, and then that dropped, and we knew where we stood there. And then just recently in the last month was the probably 4, maybe 5 bills specifically related to small cell, this wireless technology, and where they were going. Those bills, had they had passed, would have taken this requirement from us, and it would have put it at the state level. So we would have one process to follow. The guidelines would be clear on what had to be done, and we would have much more limited ability to, I don't want to say protect our rights away, but manage our rights away.
I think that's, from what I've read, and of course, small cell tower issues are all over the news everywhere, but from what I've read from the Maryland Municipal League and what I've heard coming out of Prince George's Municipal Association, that sort of where they're hoping to herd all of the, at least Maryland municipalities towards sort of having one cohesive set of guidelines for municipalities to follow. So I'm clear, we as a city could control the general appearance and general placement of these towers.
I think general is the word.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're not towers, they're
I'm
poles.
sorry, poles. I'm sorry, you're
Yes.
right.
We will not allow towers.
We made that distinction some time ago, I recall. So we can control, and you mentioned slender poles. I also want to sort of revisit what Councilman Les was talking about regarding the burying of wires. Now, this past summer, I took a tour during the Maryland Municipal League Summer Conference in Ocean City to neighborhoods in Ocean City that had poles erected. Every one of those was an existing community, but all the wires were placed underground in some manner or another and then ran up the pole, whether it was a new pole or whether it was an existing, mainly new pole. So I'm just interested in totally understanding, as Councilman Les was pointing out, that we hopefully will have the ability to require for new pole installation that where appropriate underground connectivity or wires are.
Yes,
are
that would
underground.
absolutely happen.
Now, some time ago, you presented to us, I think it was you, things kind of slip every now and then, a presentation where you had showed these small boxes on cable
Yes.
that would presumably have been running from existing
Yes.
pole.
It's a micro small cell.
And that sort of thing is included in what we're talking
It is
about.
included in this. So Ordinance 1933 talks specifically about those devices. But what we say in here is they will be allowed on existing utility poles where we typically have connections. We will not allow them to run strands, also called a strand small cell, between 2 light poles. We won't allow them to do that. We've told them we won't do that.
Okay. That's all I have. Anything else, Council? You ready to introduce this tonight? Yeah? Okay. Mr. Frost, I'm sure the council would agree that we'll reserve the privilege of coming back to you with any further questions as we continue to analyze and review this document.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
President.
That's all we have on the work session agenda. Is there any other business to come before the work session? Seeing none, we'll adjourn the work session. I'll confer with the council. No, I can't. That's it.
Get an email.